With the dawn of history, two great civilizations emerged. The gods and heroes of Egypt and Mesopotamia were still half animal, half man. Then, about 4,000 years ago, in the fertile crescent of land which bridged these early civilizations, the idea of a single, formless, unique God gradually arose, and the drama of the Hebrew people began. The Lord said unto Abraham, "Get thee out of thy country. Unto a land I will show thee, and I will make thee a great nation. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed." So the tribes of Abraham departed and lived for a while in the land of Canaan. But when a time of famine descended on them, they sought refuge in Egypt. Here, at first, they were welcome. But later, when cruel rulers came to the throne, they were enslaved. After several generations, Moses led them out of bondage. On Mount Sinai, he withdrew, alone, and made a covenant with the God of his fathers. Meanwhile, his people, lonely and leaderless, turned again to the ancient custom of animal worship. But Moses returned and rebuked them. And in the long years of their wandering, he gave the Hebrews a sacred code which was to govern their way of life and ensure their survival throughout the ages. From this covenant between God and man, a sense of human justice evolved, which was to influence not only the Hebrew people, but the entire development of Western history. After 2 centuries of struggle, the Hebrews established themselves in the land of Canaan. Here, they chose their first kings. Under Solomon, the kingdom expanded and flourished. A temple was built to house the Ark of the Covenant. For some of the people, this was a time of prosperity. Others were burdened with heavy taxation. The country was divided. Royal power continued to be abused, and pagan worship was revived. The luxury and laxity of this period were challenged by many great prophets who warned the Hebrews against the injustice of man to man and cried out to them to remain loyal to the God of their fathers. Then, in the year 587, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. The Judean king was captured, blinded, the temple burned. Tens of thousands carried into captivity. Here in Babylon, without a land of their own, without a temple, without a king, the Jews preserved their identity and kept their faith alive. In place of temple ritual, they created the synagogue. Here, aging scholars, fearing their beliefs and customs might be wiped out completely, sought to preserve their ancient oral traditions in the written word. And Judaism became the religion of the book. After Babylon had fallen to the Persians, the exiled Jews were allowed more freedom. As the years passed, under more tolerant rulers, they prospered and multiplied. Finally, when given permission to return to their homeland, the majority preferred to remain in Babylon. Those who did return to Jerusalem, in time rebuilt the temple. Then came waves of conquest from the west. Some of the Jews accepted Greek speech and customs, but eventually they rebelled, successfully, driving out the invaders. The kingdom of the Maccabees, however, came to an end, and Jerusalem was engulfed in the Roman Empire. This wave of invaders was met by zealous Jewish nationalists who arose in fierce revolt. This time the attempt failed. It was during this period of Roman occupation that Jesus lived, and that the Christian church began. In the year 70, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Once again, the temple was leveled to the ground. Even in the face of destruction and desolation, their spirit of unity remained intact. In the next 400 years, Jewish scholars of devastated Palestine, along with those in the flourishing academies of Babylon, developed a vast body of Jewish law known as the Talmud, which was to preserve the unity and integrity of the Jewish people in the long years of the dispersion. There had been Jews in Europe from the time of Alexander the Great. Now there were migrations east and west, with thriving colonies in many leading urban centers. Early in the 7th century, a new prophet arose to create yet another religion. Mohammed took many ideas from the Old Testament and acknowledged the same prophets. When waves of Muslim warriors swept across North Africa into Spain, so too went the Jews. In the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries, a golden age of Jewish creativity arose in Spain. Jews took Arab names, spoke Arabic among themselves, and profoundly influenced Muslim thought. Meanwhile, Christianity had spread over Europe north of the Pyrenees. With the Crusades, a mass movement of undisciplined Christians set out to deliver the Holy Sepulchre from the hands of the Muslims. On the way, Crusaders massacred many Jews, whom they considered even more dangerous opponents of the Christian faith than they hated Muslims. In Spain, persistent efforts were made to convert Jews to Christianity, often by physical coercion. Entire Jewish communities submitted to baptism to escape the horrors of persecution, while in secret they continued to practice their own religion. With the Inquisition, large numbers of converted Jews were tortured and burned as heretics. Since the sharply defined hierarchy of the feudal system denied land to any non-Christian, the Jews began to congregate in the growing medieval cities. Both of their own choosing, and because they were forced to, their way of life kept them separate and apart. In Western Europe by the 15th century, most Jews lived in a city within a city, the ghetto. In the late 18th century, the French and American revolutions extended the ideal of human equality to all peoples. Jews of Western Europe shared in the general emancipation and rose to high posts in literature, finance, and politics. In Eastern Europe, however, the fate of the Jews fell from poverty to pogrom. Thousands in Tsarist Russia and Poland suffered incredible horrors. Over 2 million emigrated to the United States. By 1910, New York was the Jewish capital of the world. Then, in our own century, people of Europe, troubled and insecure in the aftermath of the First World War, looked to new leaders to relieve them of their fears, and for scapegoats to whom they might attach the blame for their own economic plight. The result was a new horror and a new word: genocide. Now their spiritual longing became a question of survival as the Jews turned in desperation to their ancient homeland.
Here, since the 15th century, a small population of Arabs, Jews, and Christians had lived under the rule of the Ottoman Turks. Jewish immigrants had been trickling in long before the nationalist political movement called Zionism gained impetus under Theodor Herzl. Zionists gained financial support for small agricultural settlements. With the collapse of Turkey in 1918, Palestine came under British mandate. The city of Tel Aviv, once barren sand dunes, boomed during British occupation. Many thousands of European Jews settled in the Holy Land after Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, which endorsed the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. In spite of growing Arab opposition, Jewish immigration increased as a result of Nazi persecution. After World War II, the survivors, weak and broken, saw no hope but to live in Palestine. Refugees came by the thousands in overcrowded, leaky boats. In Palestine, extremist mobs rioted against Britain's restrictive immigration policy. The British Navy intercepted unauthorized ships at sea and forced illegal immigrants to turn back. On the island of Cyprus, refugees were confined in detention camps. The Jewish underground in Palestine sabotaged British installations in protest. Unable to resolve the situation, Britain placed the problem in the hands of the United Nations. After months of investigation, a resolution was passed calling for the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab sections. The British withdrew, leaving the hard-pressed Palestinian Jews at the mercy of the surrounding Arab nations. A few hours later, Ben-Gurion and the other leaders proclaimed Israel a sovereign state. Arab armies set out to destroy the newly born nation, but suffered repeated defeats. Israel seized far more territory than it had held under the UN partition plan. 9 months later, a general armistice agreement was signed under United Nations auspices. Israel, one of the first democratic states in the Middle East, swore in Dr. Chaim Weizmann as its first president. and the floodgates of immigration were open for all who chose to come.
For 30 years, Israel's doors have remained open, and Jews have come by the millions. And still they come, from all over the world, for many reasons, to this land. Today, crops are grown on land which for centuries lay fallow. Much used to be desert. The people who lived here, mainly nomadic Bedouins, raised sheep and watched over their water holes. Water has always been a key to life throughout the Middle East. Now, after extensive research and the use of modern equipment, 3 times as much of Israel's land is farmed compared to 30 years ago. Old and new farming methods exist side by side. In the past, collective settlements called kibbutzim were given much credit for agricultural progress. Today, they are responsible for only a small percentage of Israel's agricultural output, and only about 8% of Israel's labor force is engaged in agriculture. Citrus fruits continue to be an important export crop. About 90% is sold abroad. The export of all fruits and vegetables, as well as manufactured goods like electronic equipment, polished diamonds, and textiles, is flourishing. Israel has not been blessed with an abundance of raw materials. Most of the meager mineral resources are found in the south, in the Negev Desert and the Dead Sea. Some oil has been discovered, but Israel produces only a minor portion of her needs, and the availability and price of imported oil still dramatically affect the economy. Industry, like the economy as a whole, has developed rapidly and been helped with financial support from abroad. This growth was achieved despite the scarcity of raw materials and energy sources, a restricted local market and long distances from export markets, as well as a political situation in which many Middle Eastern countries can boycott Israeli goods. 80% of the almost 4 million people live in cities, a dramatic change from 30 years ago. Israelis pay some of the highest taxes in the world, often half their income. In addition, inflation is extremely high. %40 of Israel's budget goes for defense. There is compulsory military service for both sexes. Single women serve 2 years and remain in the reserves until they are 34. Men, at 18, are required to serve 3 years in the Army and remain in the reserves until they are 55. They must report for a month's training every year. Israel has fought 4 major wars in the past 30 years. And in spite of its peace settlement with Egypt, security continues to be a full-time concern.
Okay, בבקשה. תודה. כן, אדוני.
Israel has a dynamic cultural life and heavily supports art programs and artists. Yigal Tumarkin, like many modern Israeli artists, has had his works displayed all over the world. Throughout the nation, there are scores of amateur and professional musical and theatrical groups performing classical, folk, and avant-garde works. Israel is special, if not sacred, to more different religious faiths than any other area in the world. Jerusalem is considered holy by each of the three major monotheistic religions. Jews worship in David's city at the Western Wall. Muslims pray at the place from where Muhammad ascended to heaven. Christians worship where Christ was born, where he preached, was crucified, and died. Israel's population is a rich tabloid of various ethnic groups. Jews themselves are a people of diversified backgrounds, and the problem of a so-called Second Israel exists, the successful integration of the immigrants from Asia and North Africa with the ones from Europe. An extensive social welfare system stresses preventive medicine and research. Healthcare is about the most extensive in the world. Life expectancy is now higher than in most Western nations, including the United States. Social security laws help provide old age pensions, unemployment insurance, and protection in case of accident or sickness. The majority of Israel's non-Jewish population is Arab. Some Bedouins have settled on the land and become farmers, but many continue their nomadic ways. Most of the hundreds of thousands of Arabs who left Israel in 1948 and 1967 still live in refugee camps in other countries. The Israeli government is attempting to integrate its Arab population. Many now attend literacy classes and enroll in other adult education courses. Education has been given highest priority in Israel, and a complete system has been built up from kindergarten to university. One objective, besides bringing together the various immigrant groups within Israel, is to effectively integrate the native-born Israelis with the immigrant populations. Education is free and compulsory between the ages of 5 and 15. Numerous adult courses exist, and 30% of the country's population is said to attend some sort of educational institution. Incidentally, Israel is the only country in the world which uses the Bible as a history textbook. The Hebrew language has been revived and is now a highly polished instrument for daily speech, modern literature, scholarship, and even science.
מספיק. לא בכל הכוח, כיוון שאחר כך ההברגה עלולה להישבר. כן? זהו. בהתחלה עם האצבע, ואחר כך תחזק את זה. תתפוס ממש מקסימום גבוה. עד הסוף. אבל לא בכל הכוח, כדי שהבורג לא יישבר. מה המצב אצלך, שלמה?
Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East. The Knesset, or parliament, is elected, and every citizen, male and female, over the age of 18, Jewish or not, is entitled to vote. Debates can be lively. Opinions are wide-ranging and vigorously argued. The major concern of all is the establishment of a lasting peace in the Middle East. Will modern Israel be an arena for more bloodshed? Or will it become a place where Arabs, Jews, and others find peaceful solutions to common problems?
From this covenant between God and man, a sense of human justice evolved, which was to influence not only the Hebrew people, but the entire development of Western history. After 2 centuries of struggle, the Hebrews established themselves in the land of Canaan. Here, they chose their first kings. Under Solomon, the kingdom expanded and flourished. A temple was built to house the Ark of the Covenant. After several generations, Moses led them out of bondage. On Mount Sinai, he withdrew, alone, and made a covenant with the God of his fathers. Meanwhile, his people, lonely and leaderless, turned again to the ancient custom of animal worship. But Moses returned and rebuked them. And in the long years of their wandering, he gave the Hebrews a sacred code which was to govern their way of life and ensure their survival throughout the ages. And the drama of the Hebrew people began. The Lord said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country. Unto a land I will show thee, and I will make thee a great nation. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So the tribes of Abraham departed and lived for a while in the land of Canaan. But when a time of famine descended on them, they sought refuge in Egypt. Here, at first, they were welcome. But later, when cruel rulers came to the throne, they were enslaved. For some of the people, this was a time of prosperity. Others were burdened with heavy taxation. The country was divided. Royal power continued to be abused, and pagan worship was revived. The luxury and laxity of this period were challenged by many great prophets who warned the Hebrews against the injustice of man to man and cried out to them to remain loyal to the God of their fathers. Then, in the year 587, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. The Judean king was captured, blinded. With the dawn of history, two great civilizations emerged. The gods and heroes of Egypt and Mesopotamia were still half animal, half man. Then, about 4,000 years ago, in the fertile crescent of land which bridged these early civilizations, the idea of a single, formless, unique God gradually arose.